In 1988, Salman Rushdie published his novel, The Satanic Verses. Some 5 months later, in 1989, the late Ayatollah Khomeini issued a religious edict which said, and I read, "I inform the proud Muslim people of the world that the author of the Satanic Verses book, which is against Islam, the Prophet, and the Quran, and all those involved in its publication who were aware of its content, are sentenced to death. I ask all the Muslims to execute them wherever they find them." Now, it's interesting because, of course, I don't believe that the book will have attracted so much notoriety, this novel, so much attention, were it not for this religious edict by the foremost leader of Shia Islam in Iran, Ayatollah Khomeini. Now, I'm saying religious edict because it is commonly known that it is a fatwa. And I'm just wondering, and I'm not a scholar in Islamic law, so I'm not going to go there. This YouTube is an independent YouTube that basically reflects some of my personal views, but also is food for thought for the listeners and the viewers in the UK and across the world. So when I say religious edict, is it a fatwa or not? I'm specifically, as a legal scholar, looking at the edict itself and saying that he is addressing not only the author of the Satanic Verses, but all those involved in its publication who were aware of its content, which basically, in my own mind, shifts this from being strictly a fatwa into being a hukum or a judgment that applies to non-Muslims as well, and which, in my opinion, has even more severe legal consequences than a fatwa. Now, that was 1988, date of the publication, 1989, the date of the fatwa. And since then, there have been many trials, even in the UK here, by certain parties against Salman Rushdie, saying that this book is blasphemous. And all the courts were unanimous in the UK in saying that blasphemy only applies to the Christian faith, and therefore they dismissed the case. Also, the fact being that blasphemy in itself is now very much debated because it is such an antiquated and almost anachronistic offense in this country and pretty much in other parts of the world as well. So 89, 88, 89, and then we had those cases, and then this fatwa meant that Salman Rushdie went into hiding for a while in the UK with protection from the police forces in this country at taxpayers' expense, might I add. And then eventually, I can't remember when, he decided to leave the United Kingdom and go to the United States. In the meantime, he also did an interview in which he said, and I quote, he is a hardline atheist, which basically put paid to the idea that this is a practicing Muslim who is writing about, who's writing this novel about Islam and the central characters of Islam, which basically are the Prophet himself, the wives of the Prophet, the followers of the Prophet, the whole community or the Ummah of Islam that is affected and that basically believes in the Muslim faith. Now, in 1993, when I was doing one of my postgraduate degrees in law in the United Kingdom at University College London, I chose to do a dissertation, some 35 pages of it, on the controversy related to the Salman Rushdie's novel, The Satanic Verses. And I basically divided it into various parts or sections, looking at our own UK laws when it comes to blasphemy, when it comes to apostasy, when it comes to incitement of religious hatred. I also looked as much as I could on the scholarship of Islamic law on it, the difference between shatim, between all sorts of offenses against the faith and against God and his prophet, and then also came with some conclusions about how this works in modern society, taking into consideration that the Christian faith has also been subject many a time to such attempts. You had the famous or infamous film, The Last Temptation of Christ. You also have other films like Visions of Ecstasy. You had the Gay News trials. All these things that have basically put together a jurisprudence when it comes to the Christian faith and the ridicule or the attacks against Jesus himself. All this is in this book. And when a few days ago, Salman Rushdie was going to deliver a talk in New York State, and he was attacked by this young man who was apprehended, arrested, and is now in jail to go to court. He has pleaded that he's not guilty. When that happened, all the sluice gates of memory, when it came to my dissertation and to my conversations with my supervisor, the professor who was responsible for media law at the time at UCL, all that came back. So I went into one of my carton boxes, fished around, rummaged around, and found this book. And I decided that what I'm going to do with this little dissertation of 30 quite dense thoughts and proposals is to digitize it and then make it available to people, given that 34 years after the publication of the book, that it's still, of this novel, that it still catches the attention of so many people and evokes so much controversy. And of course, following the attempt at Salman Rushdie's life, which I assume was a lone wolf act by somebody who was impacted by that fatwa, although he's only 24 years old, so I don't think he was really somebody who understood what that religious edict was all about. But whether he was anyway impacted by that, by his own political and religious convictions, by the impressions he had of Islam and of political Islam in the Middle East and elsewhere, I don't know, but all that has also, of course, evoked some interest in the media. So there have been radio programs and there have been some other discussions about what is this novel, The Satanic Verses, and was Salman Rushdie right or wrong in publishing this book? He's always maintained that this is a novel, a work of fiction, that it does not actually address the main characters of Islam, where there I might actually disagree with him, because a lot of what is in that novel actually reminds many of us who know something about Islam, the history of Islam, the faith of Islam as a monotheistic tradition, that there is a lot there that evokes Islam. So it is vulnerable to people understanding or misunderstanding the intent of the author when he wrote this novel of his, which then put the novel and the author on our radars and what have you. So this is basically the story behind it. I will digitize this. I'm not going to, I cannot actually condense 35 pages of legal, political, religious work into 10 minutes, 15 minutes at most. But I would say that I will let you know at some stage when this work has been completed, sometime during hopefully this summer. In the meantime, just a couple of points, because I threw in Visions of Ecstasy, I threw in Last Temptation of Christ, I threw in the Gay News trials, I threw in the fact that there were many attempts to take him to court, but the courts dismissed every time the case as not being relevant. All this leads me to say, did he have the right to do it, or did he not have the right to do it? Now, remember, Article 19, which is a wonderful organization that defends freedom of thought and expression across the whole world, has basically maintained and maintains the idea that every one of us is allowed to think freely, write freely, and express ourselves freely. And apologies to Article 19, because I'm not reading exactly your objectives, I'm just paraphrasing. People can go back to Article 19 and know exactly what they say. But Article 19 was created on the back of Salman Rushdie's The Satanic verses. So where do I personally stand in a nutshell? And this would be a little bit controversial, because you might find different viewpoints that I elicit in my dissertation. I believe fundamentally, and I've quoted in this little work of mine, many statements, expressions that I might disagree with somebody, but I stand by their right to express themselves, etc., etc., etc. But given where we are today, and given the sense of populism where everybody can say anything that is that comes to their mind, all I would say is, when one is writing a piece of fiction or a talk or anything, one of course has the right to express one's own opinions. That is inviolable for me. I mean, I'm not even going there, because that is beyond dispute for me, beyond discussion. If I feel something, I do it. What is it that people keep in the media these days quoting Salman Rushdie as having said that, fine, if you don't like what I write, then write something different which expresses your own thoughts. Well, not everybody has the facility to do that, but the idea is there that we're all free to express our own opinions, and that freedom of thought and expression. However, there is a context. And the question is, in a particular context, do I need to say something that could incite people, that could provoke people, that could make people think and then take actions which in a later life they might regret, or which in a later life they might disagree with? These are the questions that I'm thinking of. We're not an island. No one of us in this whole world, in this whole suffering world, no one of us is an island. Nobody can stand up and say, I can say whatever I want, I can do whatever I want, and I don't care what impact it has on anybody else. There is a context. And whilst legally and perhaps also philosophically, people have every right to think and speak freely, the sense of responsibility is to say, okay, but what would be the consequences of what I do or what I say and how I act? And this is something that happens these days all the time, when people just stand up and say things which could have dire consequences. I don't want to get political. I don't even want to go to the United States and start showing what could happen, or elsewhere in the world. I just say that it's important to think before you act. Now, more of that in this book. Remember, this was submitted to a university. This was not a 10-minute talk on YouTube. So there is far more legal and sociological depth in it, I hope. At least my professor thought so. And I would just say that I'm glad, to conclude, I am glad that Salman Rushdie, who was very critical when he was taken to hospital after being stabbed, is now okay. He is no longer on a ventilator, and it seems that he can now speak. That is a blessing, because what happened was wrong, and that was not the way to express one's self. But put that final statement of mine in the context of those few minutes of this YouTube. And all the best to you.